Welcome, welcome, welcome all. Come on in. Come on in to our title speaker series room. We're so glad you're joining us again. Welcome, welcome. As you're joining, just drop in the chat where you're joining from. We want to know who we have. If we have any union alumni, we want to know that too. If we have any title fellows in the room, we want to know that too. Anybody from the neighborhood, anybody from Central Synagogue, wherever you're repping today. If you just heard about this and you don't know how you got in the room, but you're glad you're here, just say, hey, let us know what city you're from. But welcome, welcome, welcome to all. My name is Dr. Gabby Kudger-Wilkes, and we are thrilled to welcome you to our Title Speaker Series. Title stands for the Technology, Innovation, and Digital Engagement Lab housed at Union Theological Seminary. I am proud to serve as the director of our Title Fellowship, which kicked off last year and is still in motion. We've got fellows through this process of technology and innovation, faith-based leaders who are with us for 18 months. And so we're so proud of them. And then just a few months ago, we began this conversation series. And it has just been such a joy to have conversation with folks that just straight up we admire, whose work we are excited and enthusiastic about. And so we just kind of create reasons to have to talk to them so that we can get more engaged with them. So I want to introduce my colleague, David Gassworth, who is the Vice President of Innovation and Learning at Union Theological Seminary. And I want to invite him to say a few words and also to introduce our guest of the hour. So again, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Great. Thanks so much. Glad to be here. Very excited about this session for many, many reasons. I think when we went about creating Title, which is the Technology, Innovation, and Digital Engagement Lab, we always envisioned it as a space where faith-based organizations, both Christian congregations and theology schools, as well as congregations and educational organizations from other faith traditions, could come together and think creatively, collaboratively, and strategically about how to best use technology to advance their missions. And I think today's conversation with Rabbi Kaplan Mandell is a great example of how Christian congregations can really learn a lot from what's being done by other religious communities, and how different religious communities and different congregational communities all face unique challenges and opportunities, and in some respects, scriptural requirements and constraints and theology can play into how they think about using technology and how they're allowed to use technology. And so when I came across the work that was being done at Central Synagogue, which is arguably the most well-known, influential synagogue in progressive Judaism today, I said, I have to learn more. I have to speak with the person running it. And over time, Rabbi Kaplan Mandell and I have gotten to know each other. I've grown to really admire the work that he's doing with the neighborhood, which we'll learn more about. I think it's just a real opportunity and something that I don't know that is always happening out there, where these types of webinars within particularly the Christian community are engaging those using technology outside of the Christian community. So I'm very excited, and I hope we will all have a great experience and plenty of opportunity to ask questions. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Dr. Gett.
Yeah. Welcome, Rabbi Kaplan Mandell. Welcome, welcome. Would you like to say a few words before we get in, just to say hello and greet the audience?
Of course. Well, I just want to say thank you to the both of you. It's been such a pleasure already getting to know you both. And I have learned so much from the digital church movement. And I feel like Christian communities are light years ahead of where Jewish communities tend to be. So I'm happy to offer some lessons that we've been learning, but I feel like I'm the student here in many ways.
Too kind, too kind. This is a pure learning experience. I'll say that we're both all communities learning from one another. So listen, by way of housekeeping, everyone, this is not a webinar, meaning you can see each other. We're actual people behind those little screens. And so feel free to turn your cameras on. No judgment if you cannot, but if you can, we'd love to see your faces. Please make use of the chat. We'd love to see what you're thinking. We'd love to see your questions in real time. Rabbi Kaplan Mandell and myself are going to have a bit of a fireside chat, but then we're going to leave half of the time for Q&A. And so if you're one of those folks where if you don't drop your question, you will forget it, please put it in the chat because we don't want you to lose it. But then we will also have a designated time for Q&A. So please, if you know someone who signed up for this, our original time together was last week and we had to reschedule to today. So if there's somebody you know should be here and you don't see them on the screen, give them a little text message, give them a little prompt, let them know that we are beginning. All right, so I am so excited. I told Rabbi Kaplan Mandell that I have this conversation several times a week as it relates to how to be really good stewards over hybrid engagement and digital engagement. For those of us who are spiritual leaders, faith leaders, professors, academic leaders, nonprofit leaders, basically anyone who's gathering folks these days, if you're doing it honestly, you've got to take into that consideration of what does it look like to really create either a hybrid and or completely digital experience for folks. Because the reality is we're long past the days where we can do an event in person and not provide some sort of avenue for folks who are not physically there to be able to join. And so I'd love to just hop into this conversation, Rabbi Kaplan Mandell, and I just want to talk about building hybrid communities. So many of us, I think, were trying to do this work faithfully before 2020, but I can probably guess, if I were a betting woman, I bet money that all of us were challenged in March 2020 to figure out how to be better stewards of these digital experiences, where they're not just add-ons to something live, but really intentionally thinking through what it looks like to build community and relationship and to provide programming where folks who experience it online don't feel like an afterthought, right? And so I just want to talk to you. What would you say are some of the pros and cons of looking and trying to create hybrid communities? And then also, let's talk a little bit about the difference between hybrid communities and completely digital communities.
Yeah. So first of all, you have to call me Andrew. That's
Okay.
my first request.
I will do that.
You have permission. We're pals at this point. And I'll just tell you all briefly a bit of context about the community that I run, and then I'll answer your question more directly. As David had mentioned earlier, I hail from Central Synagogue in New York. We are a 3,000 family congregation with about 1,000 folks on the waiting list of our congregation. So it's a very, very large synagogue. We have 9 rabbis on our staff and 2 cantors, 2 singing leaders. And I joined the staff 3 years ago, first as an intern, and then full-time when I was ordained as a rabbi last year. So I've been on our team full-time for 1 year. As an intern, I was brought on to start the neighborhood. And we can talk more about the origin story later, but the neighborhood is Central's global online community. We started with about 300 participants. Now we're at 1,100 people from 45 states and 18 countries. And we operate on a social media platform called Mighty Networks, with a feed, with the ability to chat with others, with the ability to be in small groups with like-minded people on various interest topics. And a full quarter of them are coming at least once a day. And our hope in creating this is that people gain a sense of deeper spirituality and centeredness, a deeper connection with one another, a greater ability to apply our tradition's wisdom to their lives, and I would say an ability to contribute to society in positive ways. And I actually think, and this is the beginning of an answer to your question, I think trying to achieve those things is actually more possible in a digital space than in a physical space. And I can say more about why that is. But I'll just note right now that the way it works is that I post daily, and dozens of people respond to my posts each day. Everything from today, I posted the sermon that was delivered on Friday. Tomorrow, it's Tunes on Tuesday. So I'll share a piece of music, and each day is themed. People also engage in their small groups, book groups, movie groups, knitting group, political action groups through posting and through Zoom events. We also have neighborhood-wide Zoom events, like our monthly block parties, which are both social occasions and learning occasions. And we do meet physically in person once a year. Okay, so that I think just gives you the very briefest sketch of what.
Now I gotta pause you before you pivot. Yes. Because I know there's going to be some questions about this waiting list. It's giving bouncer at the club. Like, tell us more about what that means. Yeah, real curious before you get into the original question.
Of course. So there's a waiting list to join the physical membership of Central Synagogue, largely due to space, both time and place. What I mean by that is on Saturday mornings, we perform the life cycle event of a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, b'nai mitzvah, the coming of age ceremony. At this point, we've doubled up our 9:30 and our 11:30 services with young people performing that ritual. So we just do not have the space in our calendar to accommodate very many more young people at this moment. And we already have to rent David Geffen Hall in Lincoln Center as overflow auditorium for our High Holy Day ceremonies. So we want to make sure that we just can accommodate everyone. So we're trying to responsibly grow rather than just, anyone can come to our Friday night service. It's not exclusive to our members. But for our High Holy Days, for pastoral care, for life cycle events, that is where we have to be more conservative in order to make sure everyone has a high quality interaction with our staff and with our facility. In the neighborhood, we don't have a waiting list, but I call it pre-registration.
Okay.
So that you might just say is branding. However, we don't want folks to join our online community without a proper welcome, without proper orientation, without our small group leaders anticipating that new folks are coming in and can start fresh or at least refresh their communities, as opposed to it being a constant revolving door of new people coming in and you always needing to welcome new people. So quarterly, we invite new folks who have pre-registered to enter the neighborhood. So it's a much quicker on-ramp to getting involved at Central.
I love it. I love it. Listen, I know y'all have questions because this is just too good. And so let me, now that you understand a little bit more, everyone, about the work that Andrew is up to, let me double back to that first question, because I think everything you're doing, before we get to the complexities of what you're doing, which is on my list, let's talk about what it looks like, the pros and cons of deciding to build a hybrid community, which I would define hybrid as a community that is looking to do live and digital at the same time. What are the pros and cons of that? And then what are the pros and cons of doing a completely digital experience where you don't attempt to do both at the same time, but rather to construct a completely different experience for digital folks? So just curious about those anchor pieces of the conversation. And then I want to dive a little more into your work with the neighborhood.
Yeah, and I love that we're starting here because I feel like I can offer a somewhat balanced message about the true transformative power of technology. I've heard of fully virtual Jewish communities before. They do exist. But I think that in a Jewish context, we actually want to heighten a fully embodied and a collective experience as much as possible. So I've been thinking about this a lot, and in some ways, I think it runs parallel to the whole discussion about the balance between universalism and particularism more
Okay.
broadly. So on the universal side, the technology creates such an open tent. And I love that we're online, both for the access that we're providing people, and we have such a diverse group of people who we reach on all different levels, from ability to race to geography, et cetera, and for the affordances and possibilities that digital platforms can enable. So there's lots to love in the digital space. I don't think I actually need to make that argument to you all. However, we're also a unique institution that has a particular point of view. It has particular values, has a character, has personalities, has a history, has a collective look and feel. And part of that is our physical place. So, to be more specific, so I prayed at home during COVID for 2 years, and both individually and in digital spaces. And, meditation is, of course, very meaningful and possible in a solitary fashion. But Judaism is a religion that often speaks in the first person plural, like from the Psalms, Lechu neranena, come let us rejoice. Mm-hmm. Or when during our high holidays, Ashamnu, Bagadnu, we have sinned, we have transgressed. It's tied to our self-understanding to pray in community. And that involves objects, actually, most notably the Torah, but it's a religion of participation, collective participation. So someone comes up during a service to undress and dress the Torah scroll, and the Torah gets paraded around the room and gets touched. We're reenacting Sinai in that moment. Now there's, likely a virtual reality version of that experience that is just waiting to be created, or maybe it's already been created that I'm not aware of. And also, hearing each other without delay, without cacophony when we're singing, I'm sure that's on its way, and that will change the game too. So as technology keeps changing, all bets are off. But I do think that place, at least right now, still matters. The history of our place, the building that we work in and pray in, was built for 1,400 people, even though the congregation of the time was only several hundred people strong, which represents kind of the forward-thinking nature of the synagogue. And so being physically there reminds you of that. And there was a fire that destroyed our sanctuary, and we've rebuilt it, and it's restored in a gorgeous way that kind of symbolizes our resilience. So there's a story there, like this physical place, and it's part of a particular neighborhood with relationships with particular other institutions. It's a New York synagogue. So it's a contextualized place rather than a disembodied place. And I think that contributes to its rootedness. I can't imagine creating the neighborhood outside of the context of Central Synagogue, because not only does it create a physical space in people's psyche, a space that is beautiful and uplifting and emblematic of the positive vision that we as a synagogue hope to embody, but it's also a physical place where people can meet. I think the cons of having this hybrid experience for folks is that it does bifurcate the audience. And it means that we're not necessarily maximizing the experience for either audience totally and completely. What I mean by that, particularly in our religious services, we acknowledge the folks at home. And there's a whole thing happening on Facebook during a service where people are saying greetings to one another and are asking what page are we on, and doing all the things that would be very disruptive maybe in a physically embodied service. Folks are commenting on the sermon and asking questions and getting clarifications, and all of that is I actually think fabulous. But in the room, we are not engaging with our digital audience during our prayer services. We could devote staff to just focusing on trying to support those folks at home. And in fact, during the high holidays, we do. During the high holidays, I kind of play the role of I liken it to, during the State of the Union address, when there's that kind of like narrator's voice from the anchor desk of the TV network, which is saying, notice that the senator from Nebraska has just entered the room. I'm kind of doing that with my fingers to let folks know a little bit about the history of the prayer or what's going on. So that is, in fact, an enhanced experience for our folks online that the folks in person actually don't get. And so, maybe you could say that everyone's getting what they need, but in some ways, everyone to some degree is missing out on something. And you have to be okay with that. Maybe that's a con, or maybe that's just, it is what it is, but it's not an equal experience. Someone is not getting something, at least right now. And honestly, right now, when we have in-person experiences in addition or on top of digital experiences, it does create a clunkiness, at least right now, when it comes to, if I'm leading Torah study, I'm physically in the room leading Torah study, and there are people on Zoom who I'm also involving in the conversation. I have to be really skillful. I mean, you all know this, like being able to toggle between the in-person group and the online group and making sure everyone has their due. It's just clunky. It's much easier to do it this way. Everyone is here. We can have the raised hand function. We can have the chat. It's just easier. And also, I think the in-person experience can create some jealousy. There's kind of a social dynamic that goes on as well, of like who has access and who's able to connect informally and casually. Obviously, you can do that online, and people do, but you feel, I've heard that people feel there's a proximity privilege that you get if it's physically live. And the folks who are hosting or moderating, et cetera, if they are indeed also physically live, the folks online feel, second class. So that gives you just a little bit of some of that dynamics.
Okay. Oh, David, did I see you on mute?
I just wanted to jump in because I know we have folks who work in theological education on the call, and almost everything you just said is also something we are wrestling with within higher education when it comes to doing fully online courses, hybrid courses. There is a value of institutions that have a physical place and identity, and people are drawn to doing online programs at places that do have a campus. But everything you are talking about, if I didn't know you were talking about a synagogue experience, we are every day here at Union, and I'm sure at many of the other theology schools on this call, thinking about these exact same challenges and issues. And that's why one of the areas I think Title can really be of great value is bringing the education community and the faith community together, because we all are learning communities in many ways, and these issues are pretty shared. So jumping in just because it was just unbelievable how all the things you were talking about are things that I was talking about this morning as we're planning out our online doctorate of ministry right now. So
yeah, makes sense.
These are the conversations that we want to be having, you all, because obviously we know that we can all, get a camera crew, bring them into a space and do our best to simulate an experience. But what I have found is that post 2020, once folks realized how intentional digital engagement can really be, you all remember that time frame where everything was curated to the digital audience only, because that's all we had. Everybody else was quarantining and not together. And so what I've found is that from the education perspective, certain institutions that said they would never offer a virtual option, would never do a hybrid or digital degree, all of a sudden had to figure out, if we're going to stay open, we're going to have to figure out how to meet this moment, because it's been many years and folks can't come safely back together, right? So I think that this conversation, though it's not brand new, obviously many of us have been doing digital ministry since the 90s in our context, in our congregations. But what is, I believe, the highlight that we cannot afford to ignore now is that once folks realized how customized digital engagement can really feel when everybody was digitally engaged, folks are not willing to go back to the alternate universe where digital engagement was an afterthought. And that's the biggest thing that I want folks to take away from this conversation, that we are now living in the reality of new possibilities for digital engagement to feel deeply enriching and intentional, and not just like you're an onlooker to the main thing, which is the physical thing. And so I love what you said, Andrew, that there is something special and beautiful about the physical experience at Central Synagogue that cannot be separated from the digital experience you chose to create with the neighborhood. And also, there's a different intentionality around how I love that you talked about on-ramping, not just letting folks just kind of join the digital community without having some degree of orientation, having some degree of engagement, some degree of knowing, right? And I think this word of knowing, how do we know one another in virtual spaces, in the ways that we endeavor to know one another in physical spaces, is so critical, so key. So I want to move us to another question of mine, because I want to get to Q&A by the time we get to 30-minute mark, and we're only 5 minutes away from that. And so everyone, again, this is not webinar. This is Zoom, where we can see your face. If you'd like to turn your camera on, where you can add to the chat, where we can have conversation in multiple places at once. So please feel free to weigh in. I want to talk technology because most folks, I'm sure, are in this conversation with us today because they do see some value in digital engagement, but it can get overwhelming to think about, now, how do I do this? Am I doing this with a Zoom room and a prayer? Am I doing this with some super expensive technology that I buy it and then I have no clue how to use it? And so I know for a fact that you have been relying on a social networking platform called Mighty Networks, which you mentioned earlier. But there are other ways that folks can do this. Let's talk the tech aspect, and let's also talk the ease of the learning curve for tech. Because I know for many of us, you may be in an education or a faith-based context where you don't have a huge staff. You don't have a tech person. You don't have someone that you can just kind of do all of your brainstorming and then give those ideas to someone else. But I'm going to guess that many of the folks in this webinar today are the folks that if you have an idea you want to try, you're the ones trying it. So let's talk technology. Let's talk what things make this work of engagement digitally easier. And let's talk the learning curve. How easy or hard is it to figure out these things and then to teach it to our members and folks who may want to engage?
Yeah. I mean, I think for us, the core audience of the neighborhood are people who are 60 plus. So that's very important for everyone to know. These are
60, not 16.
60. Yeah. So these are folks who are often retirees, empty nesters, etc., who have time on their hands and are eager to double down in their engagement with their community. But that also means that they're not digital natives. And that also informed, the platform that we, chose. And I just think that's always important. People have said to me, oh, the neighborhood's so successful. We have an issue of getting people in their 20s and 30s involved. Can we recruit people for the neighborhood who are in their 20s and 30s? And it's like, I would create something totally different for people in their 20s and 30s. So, we started the neighborhood actually on Facebook. We are a private group on Facebook. And I think that's totally possible to do. It's very simple to do. It means that you're giving up a number of potential features, but the main feature of having a feed and creating posts and trying to engage folks and commenting and providing Zoom links for live events, totally possible on Facebook to do without a lot of effort. I found that the two most important things for me starting out in terms of like really brass tacks is one, keeping a drumbeat of content going. So I mentioned that each day, I kind of picked a theme and stuck with it. And I've actually adjusted my themes over time based on what is popular. People really want to learn Hebrew. Like that's I've learned from listening that that's the thing. So Thursdays is now a chance for people to learn just a little bit. Like I'll give a word or a phrase and I'll break it down and I'll give examples in the wild of how that Hebrew word is used in prayers that we use, etc. That, I've been tweaking that model, but it means that it's never a ghost town because there's always something happening. And that's just a strategy to start to build adoption, is to make it feel dynamic. The other strategy I learned, there's a great book from maybe like 20 years ago called Made to Stick, the Heath brothers. And it's really about like how to make things popular. And one of the stories they told in that book was about a local newspaper where the subscription rate in this small town was over 100%. More than 100% of the households subscribed to this newspaper. It's like, how is that even a thing? Well, certain households ordered more than one newspaper because the newspaper published people's names. They just were obsessed with like every honor roll, every bingo game, every whatever it was, your name got in the newspaper. And people liked reading, their names or to see whose name was going to be mentioned. And so I really learned from that I create reasons to shout people out, call people out, refer to people. If it's your birthday, if, for whatever reason, I'm always creating opportunities for people to feel seen. And that's, a reason for people to be there and to comment and to like things, etc. So it can be as simple as that, as, it can take me on a daily basis, it can take me 10 minutes to write a post. And if I'm just liking what other people are commenting, people feel that presence, that I'm looking at them, I'm paying attention to what they care about. I don't need to write long replies to any of them. They know that I'm not offering pastoral care, that I can't do that. It's not part of my job as the leader of the neighborhood. And so I'm trying to build a culture of people relying on each other.
Yeah.
I always say to folks, I can't take suggestions, but I can take volunteers. That's a major tenet of trying to make this sustainable, because I have a whole other part of my job, incidentally. Like I pastor to our congregants who are members of Central Synagogue, and I conduct funerals and I go to people's hospital beds who are, non-neighbors, members of Central.
Yeah.
And so I have to make this expedient, and helping folks to take responsibility and leadership is a big part of it. Being on the platform now.
And before you get to being on the platform now, I want to level set, because mighty networks is a word that somebody in this room is just now hearing for the first time.
Yeah.
So can you, as you talk about being on the platform, would you also speak to what it is? You indicated it can be different from Facebook, but can you speak to what that is, and then share whatever you were going to say?
Yeah, so no, that's exactly where I was going to go. So Mighty Networks is akin to what you may have in higher ed as a platform where folks can create their own small groups. There is a main feed. You can tag different posts so that folks can filter their posts based on the things they want to look at. It also has a chat function where you can private message individuals in the group. There's a calendar. There's places to put pictures. It's largely for asynchronous interaction of all kinds. And you can use as many of the features as you want, or you can keep it real simple. So I think it really is like an accordion. You kind of like open it or close it, depending on what your comfort level is, what your community's comfort level is with technology, and you can introduce things over time as well. So to me, and it's inexpensive. I mean, there's a version of it that could be totally branded and would be quite expensive and have your own fancy app. But Mighty Networks, I mean, I'm not an employee, so this is not an advertisement for Mighty Networks, but they do have, an app that is, that is free. So with a very low cost, given the size of our community, we're able to have this private system that, incidentally, people are worried about Facebook in my community because they're worried about privacy, they're worried about supporting Facebook's corporate interests, etc. Some of our folks really aren't so technologically savvy, and they have certain ideas in their minds about if they create a Facebook account, what that's going to mean for them being bombarded with this or that, or advertisements, etc. And so being on this more private
world.
Yes, exactly. So it feels
Yeah.
just safer and and therefore more likely. I mean, I was nervous, I have to say, making the transition from Facebook to Mighty Networks, because what I did benefit from, or felt I did, is that people were already on Facebook.
That's the ongoing statement, right? I don't want to leave because people can find me on Facebook, right?
Exactly. And yet, so I was kind of, what I said to, the powers that be at the synagogue, I said, we're going to make this transition, but just recognize that I'm not sure that we'll retain all of our people, because now people are going to have to log on to Mighty Networks in order to interact with us. And what happened was our people came with us, and a quarter of our neighbors log on to Mighty Networks every single day.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have even been able to tell you that about Facebook, because I have the analytics from Mighty Networks, which I monitor very closely to understand who's coming every day, who's coming once a week, what is, are our numbers fluctuating? Who do I need to reach out to because I haven't seen them in a while? I have all of that data just available because of Mighty Networks.
Yeah. No, I love this. I want to say one last thing, and then we're going to go to Q&A, but I wanted to sit in that question a bit, because I really want to amplify that some of what Andrew said in the beginning about how they're very intentional about curating, having, each day they're doing something. Andrew and I did a talk I have a book, and we did a talk, and, we recorded it, and then it got played within their community, and that community was able to engage it. And, because I'm not in the community, I never saw it from that perspective. But I love that. I love that kind of exclusivity, not in a way that keeps people out, but that keeps people in, right? Because one of the things I think people value a lot about in-person connection is, I get to have these conversations offline that are special to me. I get to see this person who I haven't seen in a while. I get to connect here. I get to connect there. And one of the things I'm trying to amplify in this conversation is that, done with intentionality and a little bit of strategy, that same feeling can occur online. I get to run, online to this network and run into this neighbor digitally who I haven't talked to in a while, and whatnot. And so, last thing I want to say, or really pose to you, I want to talk strategy real quick. Mm-hmm. And I hope y'all are still with us and tracking with us. But I want to talk strategy, Andrew, because you said something in passing that I think is really helpful to illuminate just the way that you think, and probably a big part of how the neighborhood has been so successful. You said just now in passing, I created this for a particular demographic. If I were doing something for 20s and 30s, people in their 20s and 30s, I would do something completely different. Don't give away the secret sauce of what that different thing would be, but just share with us about how you would think differently. Like, what are you thinking when you're thinking demographics? Are you thinking about what are their trends that they're already doing? Are you thinking, what do we already know? Just on a strategy level, how do you allow yourself to think differently when it comes to digital engagement of varying audiences?
Yeah, so I think part of it is around needs. So I happen to be blessed to work with a group of people who have a lot of time on their hands and are often socially isolated. And so the methods that we're using take advantage of those strategies. Whereas if I'm working with working people, then automatically, like when I'm scheduling Zooms or the types of offerings that I'm making for people would be different. I mean, I could imagine an online community associated with our synagogue that's focused on professionals, in which case the content that I would offer might actually be connected to their profession. And the network that I might want to build is helping people of similar professions find each other. That is not really my focus. I want to help people connect based on interests. I want to help people connect on geography, but there are certain ideas that because it's a similar age group, I know are going to be of interest to them. And that ought, you know, and I know that they are at a stage of life where they're looking to be edified. They're looking to go deep in our tradition. Folks who are in the working world would be much more likely, I assume, to be looking for bite-sized, useful information to move on. They're not necessarily, particularly depending on where they're living, don't necessarily look for, you know, other friends. They may be looking for ways in which to make their life better in other ways. So I would just be paying close attention, to what the fundamental, you know, reason why people are going online in the first place is.
I love it. I love it. All right, y'all. Let's move to Q&A. David, I'm going to ask your help in amplifying some questions you see, and we'll move that way.
Yeah, so there's a question that talks or asks about this whole virtual physical connection. And you made it kind of clear that you don't envision the neighborhood as being a place that says everything you could ever want in terms of Jewish experience can be done fully online. I would also imagine there's some sensitivity within the Jewish community that you could be taking resources or potentially threatening smaller synagogues that struggle to even get a minyan, enough people to even do the prayer. So kind of how do you go about with your members talking about how to engage in the physical space? How do you, you know, what does that look like? Are most of your members also within a close proximity to a physical synagogue that they might engage with for, say, a life cycle event? So just what's that look like?
Yeah. So we're talking about two different things. We're talking both about whether we at the neighborhood would ever maybe say, you don't need Central Synagogue, you have Mighty Networks, and we're going to engage in worship, and we're going to just do everything online. See, I have the organ behind me. It's all good. There is no physical space you ever have to think about or worry about. I would not go down that road for the reasons I already described. But what you're also talking about is people's relationship with their local institutions. And as you alluded to, that's a very, very sensitive and important topic that we have emphasized again and again. Dual citizenship is a good thing. That I can't be your local pastoral care support. That there are certain things that what it means to be part of a Jewish community, whether it's like physically being at someone's bedside, you know, in a time of need, or sitting in a sukkah during the holiday of Sukkot, where we're outside in nature together. Yes, we could individually bring our computers outside in nature. Yes, there are workarounds, but we value the 3D experience as well. And so that's why when people join from a financial standpoint, we say, if there's a question of whether or not you can contribute the suggested amount to the neighborhood, you should first give to your local community. Don't make finances the reason why you join the neighborhood and not your local synagogue. So that's one thing. And then I just last week had a Zoom with a number of neighbors who had said to me that they feel guilty because they are getting a lot from our community, and it leads them to not go to their local synagogue. And so I wanted to talk with folks about what does it mean to leverage the unique benefits of your local community. Maybe our Friday night service is particularly special to you because of the music, because of whatever. And yet there are particular people and particular celebrations and particular ability to be with an entire family. You know, an entire family is not logging on to the neighborhood at the same time and being on the Zoom together. Whereas if you want to be connected intergenerationally, you have to join, you know, your local Jewish community. So we're trying to help be transparent about the dilemmas that people are feeling and experiencing. And people have ideas for one another as well. The biggest takeaway from that conversation last week was, wow, actually, I'm learning some things in the neighborhood that I could bring back to my local community. I don't want to be that person who's like, well, the way they do it at Central Synagogue. I mean, no one wants to hear that, but saying, I have some content that I want to share with others. Anyone who's interested in like learning a Hebrew word of the week, I have, something that I could offer to all, and we could study it together, or whatever the case may be. So that allows folks to feel like these aren't even distinct experiences I'm having, but there could be a bridge between them, as me as a lay leader, like being leaderly within my physical experience. The last thing I just want to say, it's not exactly related to your question, but I feel like it must be underscored, is that what I find so special about what we're doing in the neighborhood beyond the access is that ordinarily a very active member of our synagogue would be at the synagogue once a week, would come for our Friday night service. That would be considered, okay, you're hardcore. You're coming once a week to our building, or maybe more than once a week because you're dropping your kids off for religious school. But let's assume you don't have kids. If maybe you're also coming, one weeknight, because we have programs happening all the time. So maybe you're coming twice a week. Whoa, that's like, you are really super serious. In the neighborhood, as I mentioned, 25% of our people come every single day. And so their understanding and experience of what Judaism even is, as something that they are integrating more fully into their lives, gets totally exploded and expanded. So to me, that's the huge opportunity here, is to shrink the amount of time required. You don't have to come to the synagogue for 90 minutes on a weeknight. You can log on in the morning for 5 to 10 minutes and get something of value that can enrich your life, and then go on with the rest of your day. But it leads you to feel like, wow, this Jewish wisdom, this way of trying to walk through the world is accessible and digestible to me. And that is, to me, a revolution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Love it.
Yeah.
Do we have more questions, David?
We do. There's a question about, what tips you might provide a faith community that doesn't necessarily have the kind of waiting list or, brand name of Central Synagogue. Like if you were doing this as a spiritual entrepreneur and not necessarily, attached, to not give another education example, Southern New Hampshire University essentially started as a small liberal arts college that had this big vision of what if we created this national model of online education. So envision if you were not Central Synagogue and you were a small synagogue that said, I have a big idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about like choosing a niche and working that niche. So for example, something that I'm doing that I would do if I were Southern New Hampshire Synagogue is, I'm actually, Dr. Gabby, you participated in this with me, this Psalms project. This is kind of like a mini initiative that we're doing at Central that anyone could have done, where it's like, we're going to read a psalm a day, 5 days a week. There are 150 psalms, so it's a 30-week project. And we're going to, among other things, we're going to have Zoom conversations with scholars and practitioners about those psalms. I'm also doing a podcast each week with a musician who has taken the psalm and turned it into a musical setting. And we're basically going behind the music with that psalm to understand what makes that song work so well, and hearing the story of that whole thing. That could be your ticket to ride. That you're not necessarily going to have the best choir, you're not going to, but what you are going to do is identify the thing that maybe matches the talents or passions or assets of your community, maybe, whatever it is. And you're going to start to test that and refine it, and then go big with it to advertise it, or start being known for that thing to attract folks to that. I think that, it's hard for any institution to be everything to everyone. I mean, even at Central, I'm outsourcing things rather than create it myself, I'm saying, here's like amazing content on X or Y topic that you all should look at together or engage with together. So either your specialty is going to be some piece of content that you're doubling down on and producing for others and being known for, or maybe what your niche is that you are able to be super warm and welcoming and inclusive to everyone. You're going to curate all of your content. You're not going to create any of the content on your own, but instead you're just going to be like the most relational place possible, and be well known for that. And then folks are going to gather together to consume the content that comes from other places. So I think those are two different axes that you can work if you want to grow this.
Well, one thing I would jump in there and add, you said it earlier, the importance of consistent content. To anyone who's asking this kind of, can I do this too? Whether you're curating the content or whether you're creating it yourself, there's got to be some reliable rhythm that people know that they can access it. And I think that's one of the biggest things that folks, when they're focused on launching something, they forget about that. What is going to be my output rhythm? And if you can't put output out very consistently, then don't do a ton at the beginning and then slow up. Just train people once a month, once a week, twice a week, right? But it's less about how much you can do and more about how reliably you do the thing you say you can do.
Right. Yeah. To meet expectations, exceed expectations. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Under promise, over deliver. Content is it's an Achilles heel for so many. So
I see a question about boosting Zoom attendance, and I'd love to talk about this briefly, because I would kind of I would highlight the fact that when we have low attendance for things, rather than me saying, okay, how do we get more people to come to this? I'm going to assume that that low attendance is telling me something. And maybe it's telling me about the topic that I've chosen, or maybe it's telling me about the time that I've chosen to do it. But like, you kind of run A/B tests of like, well, we always do events on Thursday nights at this time, and sometimes we get 70 people and sometimes we get 10. What's going on with that 10? Oftentimes it's the topic, or something that started very popular, and then over time, I was doing this thing called noshing with neighbors, where I would invite neighbors on, one particular neighbor was in the hot seat, and I would interview them, and everyone else would come and get to know that person. And it was popular for a while, and then people weren't coming. And I was like, oh, first question was like, how do you boost attendance back? But actually, the real question was like, why are we still doing this? Like, should we be doing this at all? Like, if people are not coming, maybe we should just not do this and try something else until we strike gold. And so that's something I would just encourage in general, is like developing an experimental mindset of like, nothing is sacrosanct in our online strategies.
Our pivot and design challenge language.
Yeah.
Don't get me started.
Okay, good. Yeah. So to me, that's hard for any religious institution to adopt. Like, and obviously, if no one comes to, or very few people come to our Saturday morning service, we're still going to have a Saturday morning service. There are certain things we will always do, but we might ask ourselves, dramatically, like, what about this is not working, as opposed to like trying to just, quote unquote, just get people to come.
Yeah. Just to build on that, I think a lot of religious institutions, one of the organizational dynamic factors you have to consider is the lay leadership, the board, those who are in positions of decision-making. So in terms of the neighborhood, is there any sort of board that you're working with when it comes to changing even ritual practices, those are often where, that's not easy to do because there is a leadership structure? Or is this really still either a kind of organizing without, without a formal set of authority involved? Or what does that look like? And how might that play into your ability to do these pivots?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, ritually, that is all happening live. So, in physical presence. So if there are changes to be made to the actual religious service, that's not something that I would have, the authority to adjust. But within the neighborhood rituals that we do, like if I were to stop doing our monthly block party, is there a board who would need to approve that decision? And the answer is no. There is no board that within the neighborhood. I mean, I answer ultimately to our synagogue board. So if I were to make some dramatic change, I would need to consult the board. But even going from Facebook to Mighty Networks did not require the board's approval. That was something that I had the ability to do. Obviously, any leader is going to make sure that your followers are with you. Otherwise, you're not going to be leading very many people for too long. So, for example, I've noticed that we're going to need the next level of group leader training in the neighborhood, because there are certain groups that it's clear to me that it's a good thing I taught 7th grade in a prior life, because there are certain things you learn as a classroom teacher about how group dynamics work. So nothing surprises me anymore. But even like if you're leading a group, this is such a very specific example, but I think it reveals something. If you're leading a group of peers and you intend for the group to follow an agenda, and people in that group are instead thinking that this is a casual conversation. So whatever I contribute to this conversation is fine. It's all good. We're just hanging out. But the person leading that conversation actually is intending for every person's comment to be aligned to the topic. Well, you're going to need to be very explicit about that with your group ahead of time. Otherwise, there's going to be a big mismatch and there's going to be drama, which, my friends, there was recently in the neighborhood. And so I have got to be circling the wagons of my de facto board. I mean, they're leaders who have been volunteers, and yes, there's drama. And so we have to do a reset as a group in order, because they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting. They're the ones who are meeting with all these small groups on a regular basis. So I can't really move so dramatically without having those folks feel consulted. I mean, not only would it not actually make sense for me to do that because I could be flying blind, but also just politically speaking, it would just feel like, we're the ones who are doing all this work, and suddenly like you're making all this unilateral moves, you're ruining things that we like, or you're messing with things that are working. That would just be faulty. But I am lucky that technically speaking, I could make those changes unilaterally if I chose to.
What I love about this, and we're journeying to a close. We're a few minutes out from our close. What I love about this, Andrew, is that you just in answering that question continually illustrated that there is a team of folks that are so key and core to the success of this digital community that you run. And I love that as kind of a closing thought, because I think that we have been programmed to really get intentional and specific about staffing out physical experiences. But for whatever reason, when it comes to digital options, be it in education, David, or be it in religious communities, my other hat is I'm a pastor in Brooklyn. Usually it's a free-for-all, like, to be honest. Like, normally it's like, here's the place we go to virtually, have at it. Like, we'll open up the room and go for yourself, or, we'll put the cameras on. And I think, even to some of the questions that are like, How do you get more engagement on Zoom? How do you this? How do you that? Certainly, if it's not working, assess. I love that response. But I also want to echo, and I hope this has come through in this conversation, that curating digital community requires as much, if not more, intentionality, folks willing to give some labor to it, whether it's volunteer or paid, a checking in of what's working and what's not, and engaging of the folks that show up. I love when you said, taking account of, saying people's names and highlighting their experiences. One of the things I love the most about digital community is, you can be in the middle of a sermon and somebody's, commenting, and you can say,
yes.
like, oh yeah, Andrew, I agree with that, or yeah, Kelly, I get that, or yeah, Beth, and they're like, oh wow, like the person preaching is also like they're kind of co-building with me, and now I don't want to leave the sermon because they may say my name, and so there's all these ways in which, that I hope people hear this, there's all these ways in which hybrid community construction is so worthy of intentionality and volunteers and scaffolding and spacing and alignment. And I think that's a big part of probably what makes the neighborhood such a desired place to be for those folks who are visiting it at least once a day. And I think it's so important for those on the call who are struggling with how to make digital community feel engaging, a reminder that it too is going to take a team and some work, some witnessing, some listening, some shifting of tactics, some engagement, but it's so worth it. It's so worth it. And so we're at our 1 hour mark. I want to give you an opportunity to just share some closing remarks, and then we'll close for the afternoon.
Sure thing. So I'll just build on what you said with a little bit of Torah. So in the book of Exodus, we read about the Mishkan, which is the traveling tabernacle. And the people are called to participate in its creation. And the people do bring all sorts of things. They're generous of heart. They bring their gold and their silver, but also their threads and their dolphin skin. How that came about is a whole other topic. And it's one of the most successful projects that happens in our sacred text because everyone is involved. And that's what's really, really remarkable about, I think, what we're doing is that it is not a passive experience. It is not simply watching the service, or as you said, like turning the camera on, but there's actually an expectation. You have to participate, in order for this. Otherwise, it's not really a community. People ask me all the time, like, what makes this a community? And for me, that it has to be give and take. And so that requires expecting and creating opportunities for people to contribute. And so it worked back then, and it's working more and more every day here as well.
Rabbi Andrew Kaplan Mandell, thank you. This is extraordinary. To everyone who's joined us today, thank you so much. And this will live on the Union Theological Seminary YouTube page. Look for our title speaker series playlist, and you will be able to find it. And are there ways that folks can stay connected to you or get more involved with the work you're up to that you want to share?
Absolutely. I'll put my email in the chat. So please, or you could also email neighborhood@sensyn.org if you want to engage further. Pleasure to meet you all. And if you're ever, in New York City and want to stop by our synagogue, we're always delighted to welcome guests as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Everyone, enjoy your afternoon. Thank you for being with us.
Be well.